My name is Andy Maggs, and since 2012 I've operated as a professional coach. Still learning. I think that's the joy of all of us having this profession, whether it's our full-time or whether some of you you're working it within your day roles, or it's something you're moving towards in the future. I've done just over 14,000 hours of professionally logged coaching, still learning, and I enjoy that immensely. I've also got the pleasure of, genuine pleasure of also running a business that is ILM approved. So I run ILM level 5 and level 7 coaching mentoring programs. And I've taken over 500 students through those, some of which is about internal coaching, using it for within their leadership portfolio and skills. Others, it's about exiting and actually developing chance to coach as an external activity, or a combination or hybrid. But for at least a couple of years, I've struggled with evaluation. How do I do it? Do I do it really that well? Is there something else that I can do? And what I wanted to do was to use this platform, that we're here to kind of share our experiences, grow our professional standing, and also in terms of our own continuous development. And in a way, I've been kind of hiding. I've been hiding from evaluation for a couple of reasons. I've caught myself, maybe in the pandemic, I don't know what your experience has been, but almost with a lot more free coaching offering to help in national health in the UK, humanitarian support that I work with the HNC, humanitarian coaching network, but also my own paid professional work. I've almost pulled back. Overwhelm seems to be almost the topic of today, understandably, with people struggling with workloads, virtual working, uncertainty. So I've caught myself pulling back and not evaluating as much coaching work as I used to do. And so I was kind of curious. I am curious about that, and I want to try and learn myself and keep going, keep progressing, and also have this standing in my own ILM programs that I run. How do I help my students? Because evaluation is part of the criteria that we work with. And I've kind of also caught myself. I work with 3 different coaching brokerage, and I caught myself recently, and very embarrassed to say, being asked to put forward some ideas for evaluation. How could we do it better? What could we do to set contracts up better, whether coaching or mentoring? And I hid. I didn't share it. I almost felt that I didn't want to share my work. So I'd like to thank you for allowing me to appease that guilt and shame today, and allowing me to share to this community some thoughts and some ideas. So with your permission, what I'd like to do is go through a discussion about what's common about our work in evaluation. What are we doing? What are we not doing today? And part of that's going to be me, part of that's going to be you. We'll do breakout rooms, and also please feel free to use the chat, and I'll look to the side of my screen to try and keep appraised of that. But also, with your permission, talk about what are the barriers? What barriers have I come across? What's getting in the way of us as coaches? What's going in the way of me and the coaches I speak to around the globe, not just the UK? What seems to kind of pulls back on some of the evaluation? And also some of the ideas. So let's take this a little bit further. What are some of the things that I've tried to experimented in my own practice as a coach, but also in taking it to hundreds of other students that I've supported through ILM 5 and ILM 7, all of which are also EMCC Equality awarded. So, taking some people right the way through to professional designation. I'm still learning. And then hopefully my gift to you, to share some practical tips. Anything I shared today, I'll make available. Some templates I'll share with you, some different tools, some real practical. My background, I'm an engineer, so my bias is definitely practicality in how I coach, what I coach, and I've used some templates to try and help that. Please feel free to stay on mute. As we come into the breakout rooms, you can come off mute, and then you can engage with with a smaller group, and we can bring that through using chat. And again, feel free to use chat. If there's any questions that emerge, I'll take time to pause and just look to my left to see whether there are any questions. So what's current? Well, I asked this of over 24 coaches most recently. I used LinkedIn and I got a number of people respond. So I asked those that have experienced coaching and mentoring, how did they find, what was the use of evaluation? But I also asked 12 other coaches. I went into organizations and talked to coaches that were working in a number of clients. And I asked this question. So I'm going to launch a poll. And I welcome you. You should see the poll on screen now. How would you answer it from your position as a coach? To what extent are you? So, I invite you to answer it through yourself. This is anonymous, so, just really welcome an honest response. What are you doing? Not at all. It's kind of implicit, which I definitely do sometimes. I almost kind of feel that I don't want to ask the topic of that nature. Others, it's more informal. And other times it's a lot more explicit. We discuss it, we involve sponsors. And then the final bit is, we actually use figures. We look at what is the fiscal benefit. So you can see the results for yourself. It's fascinating. Thank you for doing that. 4% are doing some kind of return on investment. I'm really impressed. 73% say you're sharing some kind of explicit contracting with stakeholders and a sponsor. The actual results I found in Turkey was that actually those that are experiencing coaching were slightly different to what the coaches were saying. I'm just curious, it's just interesting. The coaches I asked, there was less than well, in fact, more than 68%, like yourself, said that they were coaching, doing some kind of coaching evaluation or mentoring evaluation. But when I look at these figures, it's really interesting. 8% said that they were doing some kind of return on investment, and only 25% actually said that there was some formal evaluation. And it's kind of interesting. It's not a huge amount, and I think I was even less than that. I think it was more like 1 in 5 coaching activities I would typically be doing some kind of evaluation. And and I have a hypothesis. I think as we're coming out of pandemic, and it will be different for all of us around the world, that timeline is that organizations are going to be a lot more conscious about their spends. And I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny about, does this stuff really work? There's almost an implicit view that coaching works, it adds value. But what's the tangibles? And I suppose that's the bit I've struggled with. And yes, I run a business, but I'm also a coach that just wants to do a really good job for my clients and their organizations. And I don't think that's enough. So what can I do to start to increase my own number so that my number is much more than 25%? And significantly, I'm also doing a lot more work on the return on investment. And I'll talk more about that as we go through. I wonder what your barriers are, and we'll have a chance to talk about those in a moment. But, a couple of barriers that I've experienced, one is that it's myself. I, as the coaches, perhaps with the coaches, have pulled back. It's great to be helping people. And, number one topic in my clients at the moment is definitely overwhelm. Where it's not just the career thing. It's not just the performance challenges. It's overwhelm. It's how am I dealing with just so much going on, it's so much, and the intensity of that being an online hybrid working, or in more cases coming back into lockdown. And I think there's a barrier that I've felt that I'm not good enough with figures. I'm not good enough to ask, and how can I help people evaluate when there's things like confidence? How do you evaluate confidence in a fiscal sense? So I think we're part of the barrier as coaches. Certainly I am. Now what about our coaches themselves? It's, I hear a lot of my clients and the clients of my students saying it's too difficult. I can't evaluate what, one of my goals or some of my coaching goals. They're too difficult. They're intangibles. That, if I leave, what's the impact of my business? And it's a couple of responses. It's a question, how would you evaluate if this coaching has been? And if your client says, I don't know, how much have we gone back and expanded further? Well, what would it look like? How might it show? And I've caught myself pulling back as well. And I wonder whether, it's our clients are struggling to say how this impacts. I don't find it hard to find a client that says that they enjoy coaching. And then when it's clients' organizations, I was completely taken back recently with a client that I work with and supported over 84 managers gain a coaching qualification. And they actively said that they did not want to evaluate the work. And it really struck me, and and one of the reasons given, what I heard, was finding the time. And perhaps there were other reasons behind that weren't shared, maybe some political components of not wanting to share the evidence. But as I share with you later, the actual, when we did do a return on investment on over 50 of those coaches with a high number of activities, the return on investment was huge and quite tangible. But it's almost organizations weren't asking it. So, my invitation to myself and to us as a community is that we need to go on the front foot and evaluate and be more bolder and braver about calling out what is our coaching work, what is our mentoring work doing. So I just want to pause for a moment and really invite this to a discussion. And with the number of people on board today, it seems appropriate to put this into a couple of breakout rooms. So look, let me set a number of breakout rooms and for you just to have a conversation. And the conversation is on screen now. So, what's current for you in terms of your evaluation of work? And in the spirit of that, this is confidential for us. This is our work. This is what we do. Please, share from a position of honesty. And then what do you notice about for you the barriers are? Or perhaps there aren't any, perhaps I'm creating them. But what do you see as some of the things that are stopping that happening as much as it could? So I'd like to give you 10 minutes to work in these groups. I'll allow the system to automatically create. So you're going to have between 7 and 8 people in those breakout rooms. It will be 10 minutes. I'll give you a minute's warning. Those of you who use Zoom will recognize the warning, and I invite you to just introduce yourselves. Would one person act almost as the timekeeper, but also that person will be prepared to come back with the help of chat, just share back 1 or 2 items from your breakout room. So really curious, what's current for you in terms of evaluation, and what are some of the barriers that you're experiencing? That's what everyone's doing at the moment. So sorry, Kathy, you've heard it again, but
no, it's fine. No. It's the reason I came on was to understand a bit better how I can evaluate in the most objective way possible. I am one of those that does have at the end of every session with the client, a sort of how was it for you, darling, and with the sponsor as well at midpoint and at the end. But as I say, I'm always a little bit cautious after what John said, not to listen too much to the hype that I'm being given.
Yeah. Maybe a self-delusional component there.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. And I walk around on a little cloud for a few hours, but it needs to be a realistic cloud, I've realised.
Definitely. And for yourself, Anthony, kind of what do you try to do in a kind of evaluating work with your
clients? Well, I mean, I'm comparatively inexperienced coach. I had a 50-year career in advertising and magazine publishing and all over the world. And I became an ILM 7 coach about 2 years ago.
Brilliant.
And I've only done 100 hours or something and 20 clients. So evaluation, I've had nothing but nice comments, which is delightful, but I just put it down to
fantastic coaching.
I suppose so. I just put it down to the fact that I was an empathetic salesman for 50 years, basically. And I sort of knew how to talk to people, and that I cultivated that across cultures and many countries, and so evaluation was a word that I just thought, well, I've been evaluated. They think I'm jolly good, but I realized that it's possibly moving towards a more scientific basis.
Yeah, I think it's.
I distrust figures.
Yeah, no, I think that's a barrier. It's almost, there's that barrier in its own. God, you come up with a figure of, whether it's a return on investment or benefits, and then people will trust those values. But not everyone mistrusts those figures, and so I've challenged myself, how can I start to work with those a little bit more? Because like any skill, you get better the more you do it. And by hiding away from it, I'm not getting better at evaluating. If anything, I'm leaning on, like yourself. Great. And we're fortunate, aren't we? We have a profession where part of the reason you're in this role is because you've got 50 fantastic years to part share, part advise, part coach, and we can do both. And we're very blessed to be able to do that, to give back. So this session isn't meant to be a criticism of anyone. If anything, it's a criticism of myself, a shared criticism.
I do think it's interesting because I remember when, some years ago, I was in some cafe conversations in Sheffield Hallam University, do a big research day every so often, and one of the questions there was about. Should you evaluate anything? Because if you're a purist coach, what happens in the room is in the room, using pure conversation, your pure language, and all that sort of stuff. And I started talking about return on investment because, like you, Anthony, I'm a commercial lady. I'm L'Oreal, M&S, people like that, commercial departments. And return on investment for coaching was seen as quite a dirty word. And actually, I only work with business organizations. That's important to them. Yeah. And it's a language they understand. And I think they're paying for it. They are allowed to ask for a return on investment.
Yeah.
Even though it's intangible how you measure it, but you have to have the conversation, I think.
Oh, certainly. I'd agree with the conversation. I mean, mine has been all with individuals in business. But I did some at the Financial Times. And actually, the brief was to correct somebody's attitude.
Yeah.
Back in.
Yeah. So, no, it's.
Thank you.
So, thank you for those discussions. I'm very conscious with the clunkiness of Breakout that suddenly you're closed out, and some of you might have been in mid-flow in conversations. But can I invite someone as we come back in? Would someone come and just kind of share a little bit of the tone of the conversation you had?
So we had various things on a similar theme in terms of some people send like a pre-coaching form, so something that gets filled out before and then gets checked in on. That will look for, sort of expected results and also be specific around kind of not just business, financial, but also emotional, interpersonal, social results as of the coaching. Yeah. And then we had another one just at the end, sort of pre-coaching again, 3-way conversations where you're involving the sponsor. That came up quite a bit. But again, as we all know, it's never as neat as that. So sort of midway contracting, and then again, just bringing up things that came out. And again, there was another one with sort of trying to make sure that with your stakeholder conversations, you are really clear and you have meetings. And actually someone mentioned having a workshop with all the stakeholders and actually just really being explicit about what's expected, what are the KPIs, and what isn't realistic, as in the line manager suddenly feels they don't have to be responsible for their staff because they've got a coach. So, I think I covered our group.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. As you were speaking, it kind of it's a term comes to my mind. It's clunky.
Yeah.
The clunkiness to it. Can I invite someone else from another group? Anything about the barriers that you spoke about? The things that anything else that arose in your discussion?
I can share from my group. So
thanks, Karen.
One of the barriers was sometimes when the coaching is very stretching and challenging, so that middle bit when it feels very uncomfortable, sometimes the feedback might not be necessarily positive at the end, or it might not feel it. So they make, when they're in that middle of it. And then also we share that if sometimes a client when they're being coached, it starts to become a mismatch of them in their team or them for their organization. And they, through coaching, they've kind of become more aware and making choices for themselves. And that might result in the organization not seeing coaching as working in some way or evaluating it positively, even if it's a positive step for the client. So that kind of other factors that kind of make muddy the evaluation, if you like. So
yeah. And it's a great term, muddy. Thank you. Yeah, that kind of a muddiness to that. Anyone else that would like to speak? There's something else that's not being shared that within that sense of barrier, or what are you doing currently?
Maybe something we discussed in our group. As one strong point was that the evaluation is part of the design of the initial design. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah.
To set the measures and the way of measurement in the beginning, so it's all consistent. And what I also shared from my side that the initial evaluation usually is less broad as the final one. I mean, the design is not so extensive as the final report. Let's call it that way. In the sense that there are much more outcomes that the client could imagine. Yeah. Like, for instance, I'm asking about emotional effects, results, the personal effects that were not maybe included in the beginning. And so like really thinking on different levels. How coaching or mentoring impacted or influenced, improved several ways of aspects of and contexts of the program. So I think these two elements from our group. Maybe others want to add.
Yeah, but I really appreciate both of those. One is that start as you mean to go on. I think kind of that's one that I'll come back and I'll share, because I think that's something I realised I wasn't starting as I meant to go on. But I hadn't appreciated as much as you've just said about it's the other things that emerge as a result of the journey that aren't always set up front. And maybe that's where sometimes you do the mid review about recontracting, and have 6 sessions, third one in, right, what else has come into that? But I really do appreciate that. That's caught me already. I can take that away. And I thank you for it. Zoe, you had your hand up.
I was just reflecting on what Andrew, I think it is, in the comments around some things that are worth measuring that we cannot measure. And it just made me think, for me, from a slightly different angle, I'm involved in providing an EQA mentoring program, so training, developing people to be mentors. But what we've done recently with that is gone out to both the mentors and then their mentees. And actually, it's been more about gathering stories. So rather than necessarily specific KPIs, but actually getting them to think about a story of maybe a particular piece of mentoring that they've done, or a session they've done, or as a mentee or a mentor, but then just reflecting on what does that link to? Has that linked to health and well-being? Has that linked to relationships? Has that impact? What's it had an impact on? But to get them to think about the story first of all has kind of put them in that moment, and then enabled them to think about what has actually supported them with our aim of actually being able to pull together some stories that we will be able to then use to promote mentoring as a a tool out there for people. So it's just a different angle, but for me, KPIs are one thing, but that piece around what you can't measure, and I think that really comes through from lived experience stories that people can tell.
That real power, as you say, live stories. And there's some lovely thank you for that, Zoe. There's also some lovely points on the chat about using pre and post questionnaires, about using 360, which I think there's no shortage of academics, but also views in terms of what we're through. And I think we're beginning to kind of open up some ideas. So look, a couple of things. I did a master's at Ashridge, and one of the things that I thought we did really well, we tried to work on, was that we always had, particularly for executive coaching, and I used it for middle management as well, to have a really structured start as you mean to go on. So even naming the role of the sponsor, naming the objectives, calling out some goals, having some really explicit. And in fact, this was a 12-page article. In some ways it worked well. It kind of named evaluation, but it never said how we were going to do it, nor did it really ask the client, how shall we do it? It almost used the bias of your own activities as a coach, and it kind of worked well, and it kind of helped me, I kind of lent on it, and I still do, and very happy to share this document if anyone wants to see it. But then one of my colleagues at Ashridge, I've been working with Ashridge doing a number of coaching assignments, in fact over 200 in the last few years, and this is what one of the groups shared with, and I'm a big fan of positive psychology, using scaling as a question. So it came up in the chat just now. It was a really simple way, perhaps that was my engineering brain trying to say, look, if I could have something that was a bit simpler than these 12 pages, but we could actually have something was a little bit more useful in allowing that to happen. And to actually, try and do something that allowed a little bit more conversation in the conversation up front. And actually here, this was, just a very simple thing about, what are the 3 goals? It could be more, we added more, but where are we now? Where are you now? And actually encouraging the client to talk about what does success look like? There's new skills, new behaviors, new results that they're actually thinking, and then to actually come back and scale it. And do some evaluation, and that could involve the sponsor in that as well. And it really worked. People got progression. You could show there was a growth in all of the areas, and there was always a movement. But I suppose there was a messiness to this. It was still more about me and the client, and the sponsor was kind of agreeing with the figure. It's almost, well, that's what I go along with. So it wasn't as robust as it could be. So I personally took myself back to do some education. I thought, right, I'm really going to spend some hours now and put this into my continuous professional development plan as part of my journey with EMCC and my own journey as a coach. So I started to do hours and hours of reread, just going back to some of the academics, reminding myself, and then saying, Andy, am I really doing this? And how could I use it for myself, but also as an ILM provider for 5 and 7? How could I make my courses the best possible for the students coming through those, the best learning and the best outcome results? And that, this was a wonderful article. Again, I'm very happy to make this available. But what it reminded me of was a stark reality. It's already been said by Zoe about start with the meaning, define what success is, begin your program with a clear criteria of success, whether that was personal effectiveness, business, or whether it was some career. And probably all of us are dealing with different components, maybe some more emotional, some more outcome focused. But it was that define the success criteria as part of your planning. And I took 5 things from it, not just took them, decided to do something with them. I took that it was, a lot of the traditional models where it's Kirkpatrick, things of that nature are there, but we probably need to adapt our own. So I thought, well, how can I adapt my own? Because my model of evaluation was sparse, was grumbly, was a little bit muddy. But also the other thing was, if we're asking what we're evaluating, is we also should be asking, why are we evaluating? And in some cases, there is no need for evaluation. And that might be the criteria that stops evaluation being taken forward. But I didn't ask that question as a coach. And also as a coach, didn't really ask the criteria before selecting the measures. So, what is it you are looking to achieve? And then how would you measure it? They're 2 separate questions. And I tend to kind of put them together and mix them up. And also to accept that just some things are difficult to measure. From my own experience, I've worked with people that run their own businesses. So, they're owners. Do they really want to do a return on investment? When the return on investment is really about the business is successful as opposed to not, or even failing. But I think the biggest thing, number 5, was this was not a one-off activity. So instead of, Andy Maggs doing this once every 5 coaching sessions, I should be building this in hardwire into all of my coaching. So I redesigned my template. So I redesigned a simple upfront template that forced me, or guided me and my clients in sitting down in that contracting, once we've done an intake session, and actually sit down and say, look, how many hours we're working on? What are the goals? And I'll put the business, the career, the personal to give some help. And we could add to these, and we often did. What was the success criteria? But I asked the question, why are you seeking this? And put that into our agreement. But then I asked the benefits. What are the benefits of you achieving this? Perhaps, you know, one of the common things I come across at the moment is confidence. You know, so what are the benefits of you being more confident? And how will you know that you realize them? So I found myself asking better questions and building them, hardwire them into that template. But I went further. I went into the others, particularly using a stakeholder or a sponsor. And I'll come back to the stakeholders in a moment, and perhaps a little bit of a differentiation that I use to try and help myself get my head around this. But that question, what does the organization expect to gain, and how will they know it's been met? And then the final question is, how will we measure these? Because it might be separate measurements. In some cases, yeah, it could be a 360. In other cases, it could just be reaching out. In one of my clients, it was to reach out to engagement scores. In others, it was a self-record. So it was really inviting that and using that academic reread, recheck, what could I should be doing? So, well, actually, I'm not doing a lot of this. So instead of me criticizing the academics, let me put this into lived experience. This worked really well. Again, more than happy to share this out. It changed the way I designed programs. It changed the way in which we started to do it right up front. And that's the second gem I came across with this lovely paper by Eric Dehan and Christine Neer. And it was from the training journal. And they had this fantastic saying, change was observed most by other people. So if I'm working with my clients and they're trying to do something, it might be attitudinal, it might be values, it might be about their knowledge, more strategic focus, orientation, it might be managerial, but often the output of that was like the onion, the layers of the onion would be seen by other people. You know, so those were behaviors. So, you know, if I could help my clients and myself challenge, probe further about how would the evidence of a change in a knowledge, a change in a relational skill be seen on the outside, in the outside of the onion. So I added that to that. And that, you know, what I added was that bottom piece about the stakeholders. So what I started to experiment with was that, you know, if the academics are saying change happens in other people, and there was a muddiness and awkwardness for dealing with some of the sponsors because they were line managers. So I started experimenting, inviting all of my clients to have 2 or 3 stakeholders, people that could observe these goals in action. So that up front they could be made known, they could be reviewed halfway through, and they could be reviewed at the end, or just at the end, depending on how the client wanted to work with it. But what it's meant is that I've always tried, and in 80% of the cases, have stakeholders now. I never had them before. I had sponsors, but I didn't have stakeholders. And I found it's a lovely conversation. It's talking to your clients saying, well, who would recognize this goal being achieved? What would they spot? How would they see it? And how could we measure that at the end? And by the way, as a coach, I've tried not to be the person reaching out, going off, talking to them, doing, if you like, a verbal 360. I've invited them to go out. It's their measures, it's what they want to do, and invite them to go and identify 2 or 3 stakeholders. Perhaps some of you might be aware of Feed Forward, to go at the start and ask for 2 or 3 suggestions to improve that goal straight away. So within weeks of starting a coaching program, that individual has already got some suggestions of how they could work forward on those goals. So I've found using stakeholders really valuable. And the third gem I found was going back to this return on investment. I kind of knew it years ago, but I didn't really use it. And I went back to a wonderful study that I found on the internet. Again, very happy to share that with you if any of you would like to see it. And it reminded me of Kirkpatrick, and many of us, have come across this before. But what I saw were the questions in red for the first time. I kind of recognized the model about, many of us, if we ask, did our clients enjoy working with us? And the 3 brokerages I work with as coaching, that's the only evaluation they do is a coach rating scale. But that's not helping me as a coach. It's not helping me get better. It's helping me seeing, am I liked as a coach? And there's an evaluation of that. But how do I go further? So, did I really, when I talk to my clients, did I ask that question about what did you learn? Did I really ask what were the learning skills? What was applied and what were the results? And particularly if we've got that stronger baked in up front. So I started doing some other things. So I put together, and with the help of my ILM students, I took this to the ILM. We used it as a project within the ILM 5 and 7 program of a round evaluation when we were looking at this. And so we co-designed a review contract, a midpoint. And you'll see baked into that template, sorry, I'm the engineer here again, the practicality, baked in these questions. What do you think of the engagement so far? What have you learned today? What learning skills have you applied so far? So I thought, well, okay, it's one thing about knowing about Kirkpatrick, but do I even use it? No, I didn't. I kind of knew the concept. So let me really use this and live this as a coach. What were the results? And again, the outcomes of this were people enjoyed the conversations. I enjoyed the conversations. It felt a really good thing to do, and the clients really appreciate it being a stop point. And the goals, we went back to the success criteria, the benefits, the other, and how we measure. In some cases, we changed them. I've actually found that, as has already been said today, sometimes there's an extra one being added or one's been removed. And what a lovely question. I know that, and many of us will know that, to recontract the psychological components of our relationship, how should we work going forward? Any other changes? Are there different stakeholders coming in? So, a really practical application. So it's not just theory, but it's enacted behaviors. Again, very happy to make this available and share. And, go back to the original people, which is, what can I do to be even better at evaluation? And then, the final gem was, what about the financials? Again, I was aware of return on investment. But let me just remind myself what this is about. One of the models that this article uses was the Jack Phillips return on investment. And yes, we can argue about these figures, and in some cases we could challenge, and quite rightly challenge. But in the spirit of trying to do this with fairness, then I had a right as a coach to invite my clients to try, and actually thought we could work out the cost of coaching. That was the easy bit. The tougher bit was the adjusted benefits. Now, in the reports that I've read, the typical return on investment for coaching has been about 800%, 8 times. But I've come across returns when there are hundreds of thousands. What was I like? How did I compare? What were my ILM students like? Were they getting better with their coaching? So I was really fortunate, so with the help of one client, and I've got to name because they were really willing to experiment, St. James's Place. These are wealth managers that work around the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, and they sit almost in a franchise model. And that these partners go out and work with other business owners to be better. So a real, that in many cases, the coaching wasn't just about the finances, but it was also sometimes about confidence. And this was in the middle of lockdown. Some people were thinking about giving up financial services. It wasn't worth it. They couldn't connect with anyone because it was all remote. And the whole models of working were all about going to social events, talking to people, doing breakfast clubs, things of that nature. So, what we actually did is we with the number of people that we asked, and here we asked, so I was trying to find it on the slide, we actually did this with 54 ILM students. And then we invited every single one of those students. They had to put it in. Those who've done ILM 7 will know you've got to put it in assignment. In their assignment 3, they had to give it a net evidence of return on investment. So we deliberately gave them some questions to help and to actually do those return on investment. So we added some really wise questions that were built into that Jack Phillips model against the goals, against the benefits. We asked, and I asked people to talk about What's the monetary impact of that? How did it help? And then, from the Jack Phillips model, really clever thing. It just says, well, ask your coachee what's their confidence of that estimate. If someone's leaving a business and they say, well, I haven't left, it would have been a recruitment fee, it could be some tangibles, it could be some intangibles. And I think that's our role as coaches, that sometimes we need to help people and just have that conversation and probe a little bit further. And it was okay. Some of the clients would say it's, their confidence was 50%, and that would downgrade the rating. It would downgrade the percentage. And then finally, we'd ask, what was the contribution of coaching? Was it 50%? Was it 25%? And look, all of us live in a world that it's not always about it's the coaching conversation. It could be other activities of added value around the term. Again, being really, really, really practical. But out of 54 people, 54 coaching assignments across the organization, we were showing return on investments of that group. Many of the group were sat working with people that had financial figures, so it was easier. But we also had a number of managers that were in post with non-financial targets. So some of those were about things like confidence. So we stayed, we supported, we helped each other identify some things, just to ask people about what are some of the tangible costs, what are some of the intangible benefits, and make some what we called fair assumptions. And 30 times is a pretty high return on investment. It got us to the final of the CIPD awards this year. We didn't win. There were some other fantastic award winners, but it was the first time I, as Andy Maggs, can sit and say, I now do an evaluation of all of my clients. I sit and ask, I invite how we're going to measure, and I challenge myself to do a return on investment. When I went back to the first piece of study that I read, they were recommending only 5% of our work as coaches should be evaluated to return on investment. I think that's wrong. I think we should be doing a lot more than that. So I just want to pause for a moment. I'm more than happy, again, share the case studies out to you, share some of the templates. The Jack Phillips model was really good about inviting those questions about what are the adjusted benefits, what are the benefits you've got from this coaching, and then it becomes a lot easier when you've asked it right up front, as you were recommending, Zoe, midpoint, and then ask again at the end. It became a lot easier to evaluate when that was part of the journey and not just something you did at the end. And yes, I still use evaluations of me as a coach. What did you think of me? We have to in ILM work anyway with the students, and I'm proud to sit here today with an average return on investment at the moment around 5,000%. As a business person, I can share that. We can demonstrate it with clients. And in some cases, it goes much, much higher. But it gives me a data point. It gives a data point that goes beyond. So let me pause. And instead of going to a breakout room, I wonder, in the spirit of today, who else has got some ideas of things that you've done that you found really useful and has given value?
Yeah, it's not specifically regarding your question, which until now I really am enjoying your presentation and really resonates with how I look at evaluation. But I just want to do this reflection. Have you read the book from Erik de Haan? It's called What Works in Executive Coaching.
Yeah.
I just read it and I was like, wow, this is more hope-giving than what I just read, because that was not such an optimistic book. I mean, of course, he showed cases which showed the success of executive coaching, but in many studies scientifically, he showed that it's not that huge as people think because of several reasons. So that, of course, had some impact on me. And comparing to what you were showing, it's this is way more optimistic.
Yeah, and I think and he wrote a short white paper that summarized that study, which was when does coaching not work? And he was my professor doing the studies at Ashridge, and And I think that critical eye, because yes, those figures are eye-watering. You always get them. I think what struck with me was his challenge to us as coaches, that we also should be regarded what's not worked in our coaching, what's not helped. And I think that was a really helpful. I don't have the answer, but it's still with me at the moment, of what can I also show that's not added value, that's got in the way. How can you justify if you're working with someone and they like the work so much they end up leaving the company and they become a coach? But there's a huge impact there. So no, I really respect your view. My proposition is, how can I be even better at valuation? Not perfect, and there's more room to go. But if I'm not asking the right questions up front, halfway through, at the end, and we have to go beyond reaction measures as a coach, because that's not telling us anything.
Yeah, I fully agree. And what I personally also find interesting, I also do group coaching with an executive partner, and the coaches from this group always give anonymous feedback after every session. And I think, that's great, because it's anonymous. So then you don't interfere with, personal relationships. Maybe the coach is just saying it because of the positive relationship you created. So I think that's even more objective to see.
Yeah, and I respect your word objective. We cannot minimize bias. There's subjectivity in all of this, but I don't. It's how do we reconcile that as well? That stops us doing things, because we would never get it. I think we're going to be asked a lot more about the scrutiny, the value, the impact of our work. So I think I've got a year to get much better at it. And that might be some of the negative things, as well as a little bit more the robust. But I try to. I'm not a great person with IT, but I've tried to use the unintended consequences of Zoom or Team Meets allows us to invite stakeholders in as part of a kickoff session. We can invite them back in for a short part for midway through. So actually, remote working has allowed this to happen a lot easier. I use Microsoft Forms and help my clients have templates so they can send out and get feedback from their clients. Job Forms now doing it free of charge, so you can set up job forms. So there's a lot more we can do that makes it easier, quick within the a process within the program itself. And I don't want to downsize 360 either. I've not been a big fan of doing 360 up front and at the end, but I know some coaches do as a way of evaluation. Other things people have tried using, in the spirit of this to share. This is, it's lovely to hear other voices.
Andy, I found it really helpful today. Thank you very much for sharing. I guess what's been my reflections are, sometimes I try to distance myself from the impact, if you like, and not be attached to it too much as a coach, and to focus. And I've been focusing more on the, like you might call, process or formative evaluation around how am I as a coach? Am I at my best for this client? Am I tailoring my coaching in a way that's useful for the client? So I really focus on usefulness. Is this useful for you? And also recently, I'm kind of very aware that people say a bit, they try to please us a little bit, even though we try to contract for it as well. And so there's something there around asking people to come across it with, have you heard Dr. Burns and the Feeling Good? So he's adapted CBT within counselling. And he did some research that showed that people aren't honest. When you ask them at the end, was this a useful session? It may or may not be coincidental with what they say. And so finding an anonymous way at the end of each session to say, how was that? Is something I'm kind of looking at as well. So it's something that's.
Can I borrow that, Karen?
Obviously, yes.
I think that language useful. I tend to always, ask what's positive, but that even again is biased. But also, I always do an immediate reflection of and I do free association writing after I coach. I literally write on a piece of paper, how did it go? But then I always 24 hours later do how am I thinking about the usefulness of that coaching session. So I have prompted questions. What did I spot about myself? What did I notice? So may I add, how useful was it to that reflection? Thank you. Any other suggestions, ideas, options?
Just a bon mot. That someone once said that the true value of the evaluation process is what you do with it, and I think that's kind of links to what Karen just said.
Yeah.
You know, it's all very well to go through all the processes and the pain and all that sort of thing, but you know, you've got something potentially very valuable. So, and that value is what is contained in what you then do with it.
Yeah. Thank you. Respect that. Yeah, I think it's kind of a we live with so many paradoxes, don't we? You know, as a business owner, you know, trying to generate more work and get referrals and coaching. Actually, often the referral basis for people that have been coached by yourself. But I want to also marry that with this. You know, the main reason for doing this is it often helps our clients see what they've done and the impact it's made for themselves. It isn't always spotted. So even if a client says, we're not going to measure, it's fine, but how would you recognize you've hit success? What would you see? You know, whether it's those internal representations that NLP gives us, whether it's different modes of seeing, spotting, feeling, emotion, what you would be thinking. They're still lovely questions, and I've really enjoyed doing that. I don't think I'll be doing 100% return on investment, but certainly I want to do more than 10%. You know, my aim is to do 30% of my work with a return on investment, not everything, but 30%. And I've written that into my CPD for this year.
Good boy.
Will I get to it? It's an aspiration. Okay. So look, let me just close out a couple of thoughts, and they're kind of, you know, again, just kind of open up. And one of the things that my students have said, you know, over 80 of them now using the valuations templates, and I'm sure it will evolve and moderate. One of the things that people said to me is that, you know, one of the common things that comes as a goal is confidence. People lower their confidence. So again, I just took myself back. What could I learn from other worlds? You know, and I found this work by Professor Tim Woodman that talked about the impact of confidence on performance in sports. And when there's higher confidence in a professional sports player, there's typically a 38% upswing in performance. When there's anxiety, there's a further reduction of 29% of performance. Now we can see that in teams as well, in systems such as, you know, whether it's a football team or it's a hockey team, you can see the same team losing confidence. And, you know, and you add that up, it's just below 70%, you know. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, we've talked about as a community of coaches and my students is, you know, perhaps one of the things we should be saying is, you know, what does your confidence mean for you in terms of your performance? And, you know, I wanted to go a little bit more fiscal. So again, I spent hours looking around, and I found this incredible piece of work by a Chinese author that looked about the empirical impact on markets. What drives the biggest swing in markets? And 70% of market swings, economic swings, are driven by confidence. No other than confidence. So, you know, I just think this is an ongoing journey about trying to give some language for both my clients, myself, to understand that there are so many things that impact performance. And, you know, we can ask, we can probe, we can build, and perhaps we can add some, you know, examples of, you know, imagine that, you know, you're
sorry, can you repeat? I'm sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to make sure I understood correctly. Did you say competence or confidence?
Confidence.
confidence.
So market
But I wanted to be
swings,
sure about it.
yeah, no, economic swings
That makes sense.
were
Good.
driven by
Thank you.
confidence.
Yes,
and that we've
fine.
probably all felt that, you know, in markets, in our own shares, whether it's pensions, whether it's shareholding, things of that nature, confidence. So it is the impact. So, you know, in trying to help myself and my clients, you know, we will talk about confidence. You know, if that's a factor, then how will you measure what's the impact? And if we're coming to a benefit, then we would encourage people to think about that 38%. We don't go as high as 70%. It seems quite high and almost audacious to go so. But I wanted just to close out, you know, and it's not 5 tips, as I said, it's 6 tips. I think what I've learned to be even better, my tips to us as communities is verify the goals up front with success criteria and benefits, and be braver, ask for them, ask again midway and ask again at the end, so that it's a process, not just a beginning and an end. Seek input. I think that's been a real gem for my learning, has been to start to involve a few more stakeholders for my clients, and they have loved it. I've loved having the conversation with a client saying, well, look, who would really spot you being more strategic? And it might not be their boss, often it's not their boss, it's other people. If they're in a matrix situation, they can come up with people. And is it fully objective? No. But if we're looking at 2 or 3, it starts to you know, give some you know, some stronger criteria. And they've enjoyed going out, asking them. I've enjoyed connecting with feed forward. So right at the start of the coaching, go with and find and speak to those 2 or 3 stakeholders and ask them for 2 or 3 suggestions to improve that now. By the time we next meet for our next coaching session, they've already got some data points to work with, and we've got the stakeholders involved and engaged. I've learned not to go out and talk to the stakeholders. It becomes a different exercise, and I start to change the psychological contract with who are you talking to. So, you know, I contract that with the client to manage. But other tip is, you know, create your own evaluation. You know, very happy to share the Jack Phillips framework with you, and actually I've produced a little template. So it's almost like an Excel spreadsheet that you can build, but I invite you to experiment with your own. And you know what I think, you know, is we should be doing, you know, longer term developments. In, you know, SJP, we've already looked at £10 million worth of return on investment, and that's what the clients identified. But what is it like in a year's time? And coming back to that point, there might be some negative components here, because some people might have left as a result of being coached, and that's, from an organizational sense, isn't necessarily something they're looking for. So you know, when we should be doing a percentage of our work which is longer term, I'm going to bake that into my CPD. And then the final thing, which is my 6th one, is you know, I've really learned to challenge myself to play a lot more with technology. You know, actually Zoom team meets, you know, to invite people in has made it a lot easier to invite stakeholders and other people to come and share. To collect of evidence across those stakeholders has been really easy. If you've not had a look at Jotform, some of the new stuff that's happening in Jotform is amazing, and it's free for up to 5 users. I've used Microsoft Forms, fantastic, very simple. Once you if you've got clients with 365, even easier. So, you know, I suppose with technology, you know, and people, things like Jotform allows you to put it on your phone, and people can actually send those out on the phone. So I'm still trying to make that a lot easier. So it's not a robust paper exercise, but it's baked in. So let me pause. You know, we've got a few minutes before we close out the session. This is a lived experience. How useful has this been? I want to live. How useful?
Well, it is useful. I think that besides the specific context and concrete discussion, it's always useful to reflect on your own practice, on my own practice, to become more and more aware of what we're doing and what is the value of what we're doing. And besides, yeah, inspiring, sharing, and learning from each other. And I think this is one of the aspects also for our clients, that when we evaluate, when we engage them in the evaluation, this is also to help them to appreciate and better understand the value for them after for the investment. Yeah. So yeah, very useful.
Thank you.
I find it very useful because various psychometric tests, evaluations before the coaching engagement can happen. So people are not always open. They are not very comfortable. Maybe as a process we can try to sell that how in collecting the data and supporting them. But showing them such a transparent way of how the work is going to happen and how we are going to capture the nuances and the positive as well as negative, if at all, if it arises. It doesn't end with the result. It is black and white. Even for a coaching point of view, it's very simple. So the acceptance is going to be much more easier, right? Rather than asking them sit in front of a computer, do this exercise, come back with various graphs, and then end this is. By that time, they become exhausted sometimes.
Yeah.
They feel that, can I comprehend all these reports?
Yeah.
Even when we ourselves do some reports, then the entire book comes as a feedback. Of course, it is very useful and valuable, but then it is very exhausting.
Yeah.
So this simple approach helps them to more stick to the engagement.
It's still ongoing practice, isn't it? Because I want to help myself and this community. We can do a little bit more here, and if it builds it into what we're best at are the conversations. So how can we build those evaluations into the conversation, as you were saying, making that vocal? And it's how helpful. It's so helpful, isn't it, when someone says to you, how would you know that you've achieved that? You start to paint that picture in your client's brain. And I've, on the receiving end of a coach asking those questions, you start to create success before you've even moved.
Andy, can I just ask, in some of the examples you gave, and by the way, really good. Thank you very much indeed. It's an excellent presentation, and I love your charts. I'm going to have a good look at those. But I think in the examples you gave, are they mainly your clients in the private sector? I ask because mine tend to be in the public sector, and therefore that return on investment in terms of how an individual even shows their value is a little bit different.
I'd in about 80-20, 80% of those cases are private. I do a lot in the non-sector. It tends to be the non-paid for work where I've tried to help in. So no, absolutely right. So it's the spirit of this. How does it operate within that field? You have a better sense of that system than I do.
Yeah, I mean, some areas people have got a value. So somebody who spends their time or their teams are bidding for grants or things like that, you can actually see income coming into the organisation, and if they're part of a transformation program that maybe saves money, becomes more efficient, you can start to understand that. So I think there are other ways. Some teams,
if I went back to this, in this chart, we've had some of these, I'm finding that you can put a tick to them. Others you don't do anything, because you can't do it, but we're still going through these bits. Because that still has value, and it might not be we're going here because it's just within the system, it's not appropriate.
No, thank you.
I love that comment, about patient care and respectful of that, that system and that field of operation that you're in. And it's just like I've worked with a number of doctors and consultants over the last year. And to my learning is it's still been valuable, saying about what's the benefits for you, what's the lift, and sometimes it's been about recovery, sometimes it's been about sense of purpose. It's a whole range of things, and as many of you in here have more experience, lived experience than I do. My hope is that one, you've enjoyed this session. Second, it's prompted a thought in your own mind, and that you can take away something, very, very practical from this. There's a real takeaway. Feel free to reach out if you want any of the templates that I use. They'll be coming purely as Word documents. If you want to amend them, I think this is a sharing platform, to be very open, and I want to extend that. And thank you for allowing me to appease my shame of not sharing my documents previously. I feel cleaner. So look, feel free to use checkout in sense of a checkout on the chat. Just post something that you're taking away that you're going to do as a result of this session. And that's an invitation, not an imposition. Or if you want to verbalize anything, feel free to open up and come off mute and say, but let's check out and give you an extra 10 minutes to your day.